Howdy, this is Mackenzie Franklin from SideGameLLC here in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Today we're going to be taking a look at 10 more games that were culled from the Side Game library. Now, hopefully, this is the last of this list for a long while. I've been aggressively culling the library, making it a stronger collection in general, and so far the games from 2021 have been outstanding. So I'm hoping that the side game library is going to keep its games for a while here. So without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at 10 games that didn't make the library, look at why, reasons why, what we could play instead, and yeah, let's get started. So the first game we're going to look at is called Dragon Castle. So Dragon Castle is an abstract game where you are going to be taking tiles, mahjong style, and you're going to be using those tiles in order to make your own little pattern on your personal player board. So generally, you're just trying to take tiles and match shapes, and that is where my biggest problem with the game is. I feel like in this game, there really isn't much you're doing outside of just trying to get matching shapes. It does have this aspect where you want to be creating different patterns with those shapes. There are some unique player abilities and scoring powers that you can use, which I recommend if you play this game. But ultimately, it just didn't have enough strategic depth to the gameplay itself. It's a beautiful game. I could see this for people that kind of just like a game where they can kind of zone out for a little bit, but for me, it wasn't something that I felt needed to be in the library. So that's the tile placement game Dragon Castle. Now, if you were to play a game that I think adds a little bit more dynamic choices to tile placement, I would choose the game Azul. So Azul, I think, is a wonderful tile placement game. It is literally tile placement. So your whole thing is you're going to be tiling a wall with azulejos. These are little tiny tiles. They're Portuguese in nature. And your job is to get a bunch of tiles of specific colors. But if you get too much of a specific color, you may be forced to drop some of them on the floor, and that might be negative points for you. So I really like how this game has a lot of player interaction. You can play this game where you're not really looking at anybody else's board, but there are definitely ways that you can strategically look at other players' boards and draft tiles in a way that will make them lose points. So I like this idea of the collecting the tiles, and the scoring is really interesting. You'll be kind of placing them on this grid and getting points. There's cool expansions that offer different ways to score, and I just think this is a really well done package, and it's a very great entry to a tile placement game. So there's many different versions of this game, so I would just pick one that looks interesting to you. This is the basic version, but there's also one that features stained glass windows, and there's one that features the summer pavilion, which uses these really cool rhombi as opposed to just these square tiles. But I think all these games are winners, and I really like Azul. The next game we're going to talk about is called Nightmarium. So Nightmarium is a tiny little card game where you're going to be creating these beasts in front of you, these nightmare creatures. And you do that by playing their feet, their bodies, and their heads, and you're trying to play all cards that are the same colors. And when you play them, generally you're going to get some type of special ability. Now this game is very take-that-y. You'll probably like this game if you enjoy basically playing a card that damages an opponent that you're playing with. And for me, if there's better games that do this sort of thing where you are purposefully hurting someone else, but I think that this does it in a very overt way as opposed to something a little bit more clever than that other games can do. So Nightmarium, if you really enjoy the take that style, this might be a game for you, but for me, it wasn't something that I felt needed to be in the library. Now, for a take that style game where you're going to be purposefully holding cards or using cards to damage other players' chances of winning, I really like the game Arboretum. So Arboretum has you placing, instead of monsters in front of you, you're going to be putting trees in front of you in your own little Arboretum. And in order to score these cards, you actually have to have the highest value of them in your hand at the end of the game. So I really like how in this game the take that is secretive. You're holding cards in your hand of 8, and at the end of the game, you can basically dictate what your opponents are able to score. So it's really neat that you can kind of hold specific cards to target specific players, and they might not know you're doing that, or you might have to kind of forego that scoring to make sure that you're scoring yourself. There's a lot of really tense decisions in this game, and I think it does it in a great small package with really simple gameplay, and I love the scoring, and I love this pattern building game. So I really enjoy Arboretum, and I think it's a wonderful game. So that's Arboretum, my replacement for Nightmarium. The next game we're going to talk about is Holding On, The Troubled Life of Billy Kerr. I was very excited to play this game. This is a really interesting style of game. It's a very somber theme. You are a bunch of nurses, and you're going to be taking care of a patient that is dying, and you need to help him sort his life out before he eventually passes on, which is a very somber theme, but it's a very interesting theme. I like exploring the ideas that board games can tell these interesting stories, and I was hoping that the gameplay would be supportive to this. I'd seen pictures of this at Essen the year before it came out, and it looked really fascinating, very colorful, very interesting, using these nurses to mitigate crisis and disasters. But the gameplay itself, when it arrived, it honestly felt like the pieces of the game were just happening, and I wasn't really making any big decisions. I was very much in the vein of just the luck here. So the gameplay itself did not sell it for me. The theme is very interesting, though. You're recovering this person's memory, and you're playing through his story, and you're just kind of seeing these memories play out. So this game might be for you if you enjoy the story aspect, but the gameplay, in my opinion, is just not supporting. It has this mechanic where every round you have some crisis that are coming out because he's kind of fluctuating his health condition during the day, and based on what you choose, almost all the choices that are going to progress you in the game are going to decrease his life. So you have a set timer about how much time you're willing to take with this patient, and the whole goal of putting him in these bad situations, because you can let his health deteriorate so you can talk to him more, which is really interesting. But you're going to be pulling out these pattern cards, and you can see them here in this picture in the background. There are different images of his life, and a lot of the objectives and the scenarios are going to have you look at specific ones. And unfortunately, it was very much randomized when you did that, and you just kind of did it until you did it. So it felt kind of monotonous and not something that I really wanted to play. Now, if you do want a game that has a very somber theme and has you kind of think about how a board game can show something super serious like this, I would choose this War of Mine, the board game. I think it does a great job with this setting, and I think that it really has you being very thoughtful in the actions you're taking. There's a lot of strategy in this game as opposed to Troubled Life of Billy Kerr. It's very much up to you to decide what to do and how to manage your limited resources and time, but the luck is going to come from the explorations. So when you explore different areas, based on where you go, you could meet random events that will give you great things, and so you're rolling this die constantly, and it's usually a check to see how well you're doing at investigating. So it's very easy to get a kind of a median roll, but you can get very critical rolls, very critical highs or critical fails, and it tells a very good story in a shorter period of time. So Troubled Life of Billy Kerr tells its story over 10 scenarios. This one you can have a great story told in a single session, and I think that is this War of Mine's strength, is it is such a solid experience in a short amount of time. So I really like this War of Mine. It's a great tool to use to learn about something like this, about how somebody may live in a civil war setting as a civilian, and I just think it's a great game. So this is wonderful. So this War of Mine, it's my replacement for The Troubled Life of Billy Kerr. The next game we're going to talk about is called Betrayal Legacy. Now, it's no news here. Betrayal and Betrayal, The House on the Hill, Betrayal Legacy, they are not games that I enjoy. I find that the mechanics are very old school, and they are not the best. It's going to put you in a position where you're frustrated, your game is going to halt, and it really kind of ruins the tempo of things. It's up to the players to kind of dictate what they're going to be doing and deciding how much information they're willing to share, and the combat system in this is very lackluster. You feel like you're just meandering from turn one. There's really no goals here, and unfortunately, Betrayal Legacy, I was told that it fixed a lot of these problems. It really just exacerbates the problems. In my opinion, Betrayal Legacy is a mess of a game. It's even more complicated because you have pieces that last from game to game. If you are having trouble understanding something, then that is just going to play out. It's going to affect future games. And I didn't really like this experience as a whole. We actually only got 3 games into it. It was just one that we never wanted to touch, and I actually just threw it away after 3 games. It was not something I ever want to go back to. Not a fan of the system, not a fan at all. Now, it does have some strengths to it, of course. If you enjoy this style of exploration, of just pure exploration with no real objective in mind, and you're here just for the story, you might like this game. You also might like this game if you like the original. It's definitely very similar to the original game. And you also might like this game if you have people that are... yes, as you can see, I'm having a little trouble thinking of reasons you might like this game. But I think if you just like that exploration aspect, this might be a fun one for you. But not a good fit for the side game library. Definitely not a good fit for me. It's pretty hard to teach, especially when you're trying to teach a haunt, because you can't really answer questions, can't really facilitate it. So I just don't like this one at all. Now, in retrospect, the superior version of the Explore a Haunted Mansion game is going to be Mansions of Madness 2nd Edition. So Mansions of Madness 2nd Edition is a streamlined version of the original, and I think that this is a great exploration game. Now, I have it rated a little low here because of the app. If you're the person running the game and you're the one playing, if you're the person kind of running the game, you're going to be looking at the application pretty much the whole time, reading a lot. And I kind of feel when I play this game, I'm just on my phone the whole time. But if somebody else is running it, then I have a great time with this one. So it has this app that takes care of all the bookkeeping, all the bookwork. There's no questions on how things work. And it's an easy game to get into. You simply start going, you explore. And this has a story or a scenario that you're playing. And right from the get-go, you have an idea of what you're doing. Maybe you're investigating the house to find the cause of a murder. Maybe you're investigating the house in order to recover a relic. There's so many different things that this game can set up, and the app really helps with integrating that. And I think that's really cool. My favorite part of this game is the ease of play. It's very straightforward to get into, and you can teach it to anybody, and there's really no initial teach. It's very straightforward. You say, hey, it's your turn. You can do two things. You can move places. You can interact with something on the board. And then once monsters come up, you can talk about fighting and dice checks and things like that. It's really cool. It's a great game to get into. This is one that my sister-in-law really enjoys, and we have a great time when she comes over and we can all play it together. So I really like Mansions of Madness 2nd Edition. It is wonderful. I love playing this game. Usually I am the one running it, so it's not rated as highly because usually I am just on my phone or the app the whole time trying to manage things. But everyone I've played it with really enjoys their time. Really great experience. I really like Mansions of Madness 2nd Edition. It is great at what it does. It's wonderful. The next game we're going to talk about here is the Resistance Avalon. So this one did not stay in the library because of two specific games that I think cover the social deduction category a little bit better. So Resistance Avalon has you playing as the Knights of King Arthur's court, and you are trying to go on missions, and the missions, they either pass or fail based on who the current king sends on those missions. And so it's up to the players to decide who's going to go on these missions and try not to send the minions of Mordred, so that way you're able to pass these missions. So Avalon introduces a lot of player powers to this social deduction style game, and that's its strength. It has a lot of cool little modules that you can play with that change up this experience and add uniqueness to the game system, and I think that's a really great idea. So this is one of the earlier types of social deduction games. Resistance is very well loved. The Resistance Avalon is also very well loved, but in my opinion, I think that it has a lot of issues with getting started, if that makes sense. A lot of the times you are making decisions based on guesses. So it's just a lot of guesswork as opposed to having some substantial evidence. Now, it does solve this by when you go on missions, though you only have a certain amount of people that you can kind of pick for these missions. And I think that's great. I think it's a really good step in this right direction. You have a limited pool of potential suspects that you can say, oh, okay, it might be these people, and that leads a lot of cool interplay with the different minions, the different bad guys that could be like, ooh, maybe I sabotage this mission or let it pass. But I think that there are games that do it better, and this isn't one that I am willing. I don't think it needs to be in the library. We have things that do something similar. Now, you might like this game if you enjoy the theme. You might like this game if you enjoy a small experience in a small sized box that you could bring with you, and you like the Resistance style of game. Maybe you know your group a little bit better. So I think that might play to its strengths. So that's my opinion on Resistance Avalon. But my replacement for this, I actually have two. The first one I'm just going to mention briefly. It's one that I talk a lot about on this channel. This is Deception: Murder in Hong Kong. It has you doing something very similar. There's lots of similar overlap on the abilities of cards, but instead of trying to figure out the traitors and succeed on missions, you're trying to figure out who a murderer is and what murder weapon and evidence was left at the scene of the crime. And this does a great job having, right off the bat, something that you can base decisions off of based on how the forensic scientist is giving you information. So I love the way that this game sets up information and sets up something that you can figure out. So I really like Deception: Murder in Hong Kong. But the game that I want to talk about today is called Don't Mess with Cthulhu. And I think that this is a wonderful tiny box social deduction game, and it's really cool because it can play at a really low player counts as opposed to playing, it needs to be with a high player count, and I think that's really one of its strengths as well. Don't Mess with Cthulhu has you playing either investigators or cultists, and the cultists are trying to sabotage the investigators' plans. And the way that this game deals with kind of like keeping things secret is when it's your turn, you're going to be shining a light on one of these clue cards. And at the start of the round, everyone can claim what they have in their hand. And they can be honest or they can lie. And I think that gives every player a lot of control. It immediately gives all the players something to base their intel on. They can make decisions with that in mind. And it gives you a lot of opportunities to be sneaky if you are a bad person in this game trying to summon Cthulhu. It has a lot of really upstanding moments. It's got a great expansion in the deluxe edition that just comes with it, that adds these interesting powers that can sometimes be revealed on tablets. And I think overall this package is really strong in what it does. So I think Don't Mess with Cthulhu is a great introduction to these kind of small box social deduction games. And it's one I recommend. I like this one. The next game we're going to talk about here that left the library is Dice Masters. So Dice Masters is a competitive dice battling game. So you're going to be reaching into your bags, rolling them up, and using these dice as units. And you're going to be using those units to attack your opponents and draining their life. And you can use these different cool powers. And the big reason that this one isn't staying in the library is it's only a two-player game. It's only a two-player game, and as in comparison to some other two-player games, this just kind of took a little bit too long. The mishmash of all the different themes that you can play with don't really click with a lot of people. Like, it goes from WWE to Avengers to Yu-Gi-Oh! There's all sorts of different Dice Masters worlds, and it wasn't one that was getting played ever. So, as opposed to some other things. So, if you like the idea of having your own team of fighters from a universe, you might like this game. So, like I said, there's a lot of options. You could do Dungeons and Dragons, you could do WWE, you could do Avengers versus X-Men, you could do Yu-Gi-Oh! If you're into any of those themes, this might be a fun one for you. If you like the custom dice that come with it, it might be a good idea. Or if you have a person that you are pretty committed with of playing a two-player game with, this might be a fun one for you. But in my opinion, if you're one to play a game where you're going to be pulling your troops out of the bag and using them to strategically take down your opponent, I would select the abstract game War Chest. So War Chest is very similar in the fact that you've got the bag and you're doing some bag building and you're deploying troops, but everything is given to you, and it's up to you to strategically play with those pieces. So there's a lot less units on the board, the objectives are a lot more clear, and the gameplay, I think, is very smooth in this game. Your units, everything works exactly as you think it would. When a unit takes a damage, it dies, it's out. Your pieces can move based on their own specific pattern. I just covered this on my video of top 2-player games. It was my brother's #1 on his top 2-player games, and really enjoy this game. I think it does what it does great. This is my favorite abstract game, and I think that it does what it does lovely. So War Chest is my recommendation if you want that head-to-head bag drafting kind of game. So the next game we're going to talk about here is called Nuts. So Nuts is a very small card game where you play as squirrels and you're going to be taking each other's nuts. It's exactly as simple as it sounds. It gives me a lot of Pooh vibes. You've got these little characters that are They're definitely using very suggestive titles and whatever they're doing. You've got cards like D's nuts, and you've got cards like grasping your nuts and touching your nuts and get off of my nuts and things like that. It's littered with innuendos, and you might like this game if you like just having a game that is a walking meme. I think it's definitely a funny game. When you pull it out the first time, you'll really appreciate the artwork. The jokes are really funny, but in my opinion, the gameplay just doesn't hold up. The game is very lucky. It's very take-thatty. You get a card from the top of the nut deck. It could be worth 1 point. It could be worth 7 points. So they vary drastically, the amount of point values on these nuts. And you're trying to basically keep your nuts while stealing others. It's very straightforward. There's not a lot to say about this one. If you like take-that games, if you like small card games, and if you like having this walking meme, this might be a game for you. But for me, the game was very basic, very luck-heavy, and it punished you pretty badly if you didn't draw specific cards. Like if your hand was all action cards, you might have to take your whole turn to just discard your hand to draw a new one because you're not going to do much with that. So it felt pretty disheartening when you couldn't do anything on your turn, and everybody else was able to take all your things, and the swinginess of the nut cards. Not a big fan of this one. If you do like this idea of collecting things in front of you and having multiple points values, but with this huge element of choice, I would recommend the game Conspiracy from the Abyss universe. So in Conspiracy, instead of getting random cards from a deck, just one at a time, and just kind of dealing with what you have, in this game you have lots of choice. So on your turn, you can choose how many cards you want to look at every turn, and the cards you don't pick are going to go face up, and the other players have the options to take those. And I think that's a really cool system. So you are constantly on the verge of like, okay, do I just go for the random, or do I control my randomness, but if I do, I might give opponents, information, but it might be worth it because you might need a specific ability. There's lots of strategy in this game because there's a certain layout of cards, and there's cool combos that you can build up, cool abilities, and the scoring system in this is really neat. So I really like Conspiracy, the Abyss Universe game. I think it's a great little card game. I think it does what it sets out to do really well. You'll notice that's a big reoccurring thing for this list, but I really like this one. I think they did a great job nailing that Abyss feel in a small card game. So that would be my recommendation for games where you're kind of collecting resources one at a time in order to gain the most points. So that's Conspiracy, Abyss Universe. The next game we're talking about is Duelosaur Island. Duelosaur Island is a 2-player version only of the popular Dinosaur Island game. It's got a solo mode. It's got your very similar feel where you're going to be collecting DNA and using that DNA to build dinosaurs. And your dinosaurs are actually cards in your hand. And you can also build attractions, which are also cards in your hand. So the cards in this game are multi-use. Half is the dinosaur and half is the attraction. And there is this really great phase in the game, and it's my favorite part of the game, for sure. It's the dice drafting. So every round, you're going to be pulling out these DNA dice, and one player rolls them and assigns bonuses to each dice. So you might double whatever you get on the die, or you get additional DNA when you pick this die. And then the other person gets to pick first. So it's the I cut, you choose dilemma. So I really like this idea, and it's my favorite part of the game, for sure. And if you like that style of decision-making and the theme, this game is going to be great for you. But in my opinion, that dice decision is the highlight of the game, and I don't really like everything else in this game feels a little bland to me. I feel like I'm not really doing anything particularly spectacular. I feel like if I want to play the style of game, I'll just play its older brother, the regular Dinosaur Island. This one is not one that I see myself ever coming back to. I just recently did a 2-player games video, and I looked at this game, I was like, I actually am going to get rid of this because I would never pick to play this game if I could play 2-player game, and this is only 2-player game, so, I mean, take that as it is. I feel like the ability cards are not that crazy. The multi-use cards are not very different. You see some duplicates in the deck of all of the abilities, so I feel like your choice is there, but it's not really that impactful, whereas you're playing other games that have even very small multi-use cards, and I feel like that choice is a little bit stronger in those games. In this one, I feel kind of just like I'm going through the motions as opposed to actually building this dinosaur park. So that's my opinion on this game. You'll really like this, though, if you enjoy the theme and you like that drafting and you want something that's kind of portable and small as opposed to the larger, sprawling Dinosaur Island. Now, in my opinion, if you want a game that simulates this multi-use cards idea, and that's a very great two-player game, I would pick the game Race for the Galaxy. So Race for the Galaxy, completely different thing. It's space. You're building your own space civilization. You're using your cards either as money to pay for other cards, or each card has its own special ability. But the variety in this game and the reading of your opponent, I think, is huge. So the core mechanism of Race for the Galaxy is a following mechanism. You're going to be picking what phases happen in the game. There's 5 phases, and some of the phases you can pick multiple times. So I think this is really interesting. Each player picks what phase they want to happen, and you're trying to predict what other phase your opponent is doing. And in the two-player game, you actually pick 2 phases that you choose that you want to happen. And I think that's really fascinating. I think that choice is really great. It's a simultaneous game, so everyone's happening at the same time. So it does have that same feel of Duelosaur Island because it does have that simultaneous phase. But I think Race for the Galaxy takes the idea of building this giant thing in front of you, but instead of building this dinosaur park, you're building a space empire. And I really like the feeling of Race for the Galaxy. So that's my pick for the replacement for Duelosaur Island. The next game we're going to look at is one that's pretty near and dear to my heart. This is Yu-Gi-Oh! So I'm going to kind of cover all of these CCG games. So if you don't know, I used to be a very avid Yu-Gi-Oh! Player in college and in high school. I actually won the TCG Player National Championship. It was in 2013, I believe, so a while ago. It was the only one they ever had, but I won a couple grand for playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournaments, and it's pretty sweet. I have this giant check upstairs. It's kind of surreal that happened, but I had a lot of fun with Yu-Gi-Oh! I thought it was a great game, and I really enjoyed collectible card games as a whole. So this includes things like the Pokemon TCG, Shaolin Showdown, the TCG, Duel Masters, things like this. So all of these games I'm kind of wrapping up into this one. So Yu-Gi-Oh! The trading card game, or just, we're going to say trading card games as a whole. So trading card games are great if you are steeped into the meta, if you're playing at a competitive scene, and you're in the mindset of, hey, I'm going to go and challenge these people, and I'm going to do the best I can. I'm going to calculate everything. I'm going to bring up with the best strategy. I'm going to win this tournament. That's the best way to play these styles of games. And I saw myself, as I started playing more board games and getting kind of more involved in this hobby, that I like the feeling of I'm here to play the game and have fun more than I'm here to strategize and beat everybody to a pulp. I've done that. I've done the whole, hey, I'm the best. I'm gonna beat all of you. And I vastly prefer the, hey, let's have fun. I feel like the board games that we have in our library are much more accessible. They're much more of a game that I can bring out with anybody and anybody can have a good time, as opposed to a game like this where you need to know specific rules, timings. Every card has a lot of text that you're going to have to memorize because every interplay, every interaction is huge. It could make or break a game. And I think that the payoff of this is not worth the investment. So I love this new board gaming space. I love the accessibility that it brings. But if you do like that really high competitive level of play, then I would recommend a CCG like this. In the board game world, my recommendation to replace games like this are actually going to be cooperative LCGs. Now, my favorite cooperative LCG is Marvel Champions. I think that the customization, you still get that feeling of, hey, I'm building this deck, but the deck building is much more streamlined, much simpler. Half of your deck is basically built for you. You have your character that has its own 15 cards, and instead of fighting against another player with the mindset of, hey, I'm gonna beat this guy up, I'm going to build this deck specifically to defeat you, you're gonna be fighting against a boss instead. This removes the level of incentive saying of you needing to keep up with all of the upcoming packs. You can really pick and choose what you want here and play with what you have. It's really fun to kind of have a challenge. Your deck building is restricted based on your collection, and it's not hurtful to you. You can still enjoy the game with the cards you have, and I think that's really great. Marvel Champions does a great job with this. The core set is wonderful. You can get the core set and have a great time with it. It comes with 3 bosses, and then they release these larger campaign boxes. We have the Guardians of the Galaxy one coming out soon. The Hydra one that came out a little while ago was wonderful, and you can pick and choose the heroes that you want to play with. And I love the freedom of creating the decks. I love the freedom of choice on the product you buy. I think Marvel Champions is the way to go if you like the deck building card-based system. And the cooperative kind of board game format of it I think is way more inviting to other people and to actually get players involved and excited to play. So that's my recommendation to replace those collectible card games is the living card game model from Fantasy Flight, the Marvel Champions card game. The last game we're going to talk about is a game that I'm just going to mention very briefly because it's one that I've actually never played. It was in the collection for a little bit. So I received this game from EEG as a promo, and it's not one that I opened. I looked at it, and I looked at how to play the game, and it looked like a game that I didn't think needed to be in the library. I felt that we had games that did something very similar to this, and I felt that I had some friends that I think might have enjoyed this game some more. And that's exactly what I did. I said, you know what? I think my friends would like this more than I would, so I'm going to send it to them, and I think they would enjoy it. It features cats, travel, and my two friends, they really enjoy that kind of style, and I thought that this would have been a perfect two-player game for them. So I gifted this game, so it's not one that's leaving maliciously. It does look nice. It looks fresh. It's got this great art style. You're traveling around. You're kind of building out this kind of shopping area in front of you with all these different houses. It's a cute little aesthetic. So this is walking in Burano. Now, the reason I didn't take this game was because I think I enjoy the kind of more quicker paced version of this, of building the thing in front of you. And the game I'd recommend for that is Point Salad. Very different style game. And walking in Burano, you're building these houses, and you're trying to match symbols and patterns. In Point Salad, you're simply just trying to fulfill these little scoring cards. So it really cuts down the really thoughtfulness behind it and goes more for speed and accessibility, which I think is something that we already had it, and I didn't feel the need to have a game like Walking in Burano, especially when I knew some people that could enjoy it more than I could. So very loose connection on this last one, and I really can't speak to the gameplay of Walking in Burano either because I never played it, but I don't know. What do you think of Walking in Burano? And that's all we're going to talk about today. Those are the last 10 games that left the library and the reasons why. If you have any questions about my decisions, if you agree with any of my decisions, if you disagree, please let me know in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching. If you think I need to go get Walking in Burano back, let me know. But I'm pretty comfortable with my choices here. You can see Corn in the background here. I'll bring her in the screen. She was a good dog. She didn't howl or bark or anything. But thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a good rest of your day. Yeah, side game strong, everybody. Bye.